two, we'll get started. The two character traits we're going to cover today are devoted and committed. And these are grouped together because they're so similar to each other. I'm going to take them in reverse order, I decided this morning. So we'll talk about the idea of being committed first and then talk about devoted. I think these two ideas are very familiar to us. They're not remote concepts in a sense. And there are a variety of words in Greek words in the New Testament that are used and translated in this way. And I've tried to encapsulate these concepts here in the definitions that I provided for the idea of committed or commit. And it does mean this idea, pledging, of binding or obligating oneself to something or someone. You're committed to them, right? Or committed to a cause. And there's also a sense in which when you commit, the idea of entrusting for safekeeping, that you commit something to someone. And we'll see both of these ideas here in the text that we look at. And I think most of us recognize and also value the idea of commitment in others. We want to fulfill our commitments. We appreciate as a character trait in others the idea that when they fulfill their commitments, whether they're to us or to the job, for example. So this is an important trait for us to have. Otherwise, that wouldn't be on my list. And the scriptures wouldn't speak to it, right? But the scriptures do speak to this idea of commitment. And so what can we do to cultivate this attribute of our character so that we are committed as we should be? And so I've offered a few thoughts here and some text to support this idea. And this idea of commitment is expressed in multiple ways, including words that are offered by our Lord himself in Matthew chapter 10. Now, this word commitment is not used in this text, but I think we see it here. So in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus has a lot to say about what it means to be a disciple and becoming a disciple. And in Matthew chapter 10 and verses 32 and 33, he says this, "Therefore, everyone who confesses me before men, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny him before my Father who is in heaven." What is the idea? What does he mean by whoever confesses me before men?
The word confess there means to say the same thing. So you're either saying the same thing that you believe or saying the same thing as the other. So.
Okay, yeah. Other thoughts?
My version says acknowledge, so I wonder if that by word or deed, acknowledging him.
Okay.
It's the acknowledgement of allegiance to him, professing to be his follower, and that allegiance to him as Lord.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll be in a room as someone will be speaking, and we went through this recently, and they'll say something and you're like, yeah, I agree with that. And you have this mental assent where you agree with the idea, but you immediately walk out of the room and don't do whatever it is they said, because it's too much effort, too much work. You're not going to, put it in. But when you go out and confess that, it's like think that person said, I'm doing this now because I completely agree with it, and it's going to change my business, my life, whatever it is you're saying. So you're not only agreeing with the idea that's being spoken about, you're confessing it and saying, this is going to change my actions.
Yeah.
And so you're committed to the idea, not just agreeing with it.
Yeah, all these are very good points. What I wanted to kind of elevate here was the idea that it's more than an acknowledgement that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. The confession that we all made prior to our baptism is a part of this, but it's more than just these words that come out of our mouths, right? Acknowledgement. Another way of looking at this, if you look at the Greek word, it speaks to kind of an acknowledgement of alignment, that you are aligning yourself with him. And that's the connection to this idea of commit. You're committing yourself, and this is a statement of your commitment to him. And we do it in many ways, verbally as well as otherwise. Gary, did you have?
You said this, that alignment, but also there's going to be, if you're committed to this, there's going to be some bad things going to happen to you. Don't forget about that.
Yeah. We're
Because you
gonna
don't
talk
want
about
to, you
those.
can't back out.
Yeah, because it is.
Once you get in, you're in it.
Yeah, you're in it, and that's something that we have to think about in terms of commitment. So this first point is, it's really a statement of commitment. This idea of confession. It's a statement of alignment, of acknowledgement. It is, in a sense, a pledge. And this next point is the point that you just made, and it's a point that Jesus himself makes in this passage, that there are consequences. Not necessarily all pleasant, these consequences that are associated with making a commitment. Because Jesus makes this point in the very next statement in this text. Do not think that I came to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword, he says. For I came to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be the members of his household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. So he makes this point. Commitment comes with cost. And that's what makes it challenging at times, right? And this is why people sometimes don't fulfill their commitments, because the costs become inconvenient or too great. Is the point that Jesus is making here is that I'm coming to sow discontent? This is my point. That's what I'm about. Yeah.
That's just a natural consequence. When you bring good, evil reacts against it.
Yeah. Right. This is not his intention to sow discontent, but it is a consequence. There are going to be these consequences of commitment. When you align myself with me, that by its very nature means that you are not aligning yourself with others. You're making a choice here. And some of these choices are going to be difficult. And the consequences of them are difficult, including creating conflict and tension and even, separation in families. And we probably all know where this has taken place, where somebody's commitment to Jesus resulted in them having to, in a sense, kind of separate or remove themselves from relationships with family members or with friends or associates. And Jesus's point is, when you choose me, you choose me over any others. And that can be difficult. So, and this next point kind of takes it to another level in Matthew chapter 13. No, I don't want that. In Matthew chapter 13, I like the convenience of an electronic Bible most of the time. Matthew chapter 13. And looking at verses 18 through 23, I mean, we know this passage. We don't need to read it too carefully, but you can review it here about the parable of the sower. That it is a distinction, what we commit to and what we do. We need to understand, I said here, that commitment makes the difference between living and dying. How am I making this point from from the text here.
Say that again.
Seed lived or died depending on the soil.
Pardon?
Whether the seed lived or died, whether it produced or not.
Yeah.
Depending on the soil that it.
Yeah, that's right. We see different levels of what I'm going to call here commitment on the part of those that are receiving the word in terms of what the outcome was. And what some of the negative outcomes are the result of, I would translate here, a lack of commitment. And for example, the seed that fell among thorns, how was that characterized? What happened in that connection? The seed that fell among thorns, what happened to the seed?
It was strangled.
Okay, it was just strangled. It was strangled. And what, in the translation of this parable, what was the strangling caused by?
Cares of the world.
Okay, cares of the world, the worry of the world, and the deceitfulness of wealth. So, again, I'm bringing up in the context of commitment, this person is somebody who receives the word, they take it in, but what happens is they become distracted, right? That they lose the focus that is central to commitment by allowing their attention, their allegiance to be diverted to other things. And that results ultimately in this seedling being snuffed out. Okay? So there's seriousness here in this idea of commitment. And which is why I bring up the idea of following the example of Jesus in this regard, that Jesus is our example for all things, including in his level of commitment, his focus, his following through with a charge that he was given and that he accepted. And that, ultimately is reflected in his willingness to go to the cross for us. And he communicated that and used that in teaching his disciples what discipleship really was before he went to the cross. They saw it in the cross in a very physical way, but he was teaching them about this while he was on his way to the cross. Okay? And that's something that we can see in Matthew chapter 16. In Matthew chapter 16, beginning in verse 21, Peter has just made the confession. In the preceding text, Peter has just made the confession, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then Jesus tells of his death. And he says in verse 21, from that time Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and be raised up on the third day. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord. This shall never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's. And then Jesus translates this in a very tangible way to them. He says, then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So before and on his way to the cross, Jesus is focusing their attention upon the sacrifice that's going to be involved in them committing themselves to him, of being his disciple. And he's going to show them this in a very dramatic way by hanging himself on the cross. This is what commitment looks like in a very unvarnished, unfiltered way. I'm going to the cross for you. And he's told them that they are going to need to pick up their cross if they're going to be his disciple. The commitment I'm going to show to you is a commitment that you need to model to be my disciple.
And of course, none of them knew the significance of what he's saying right now until much later and after this. And I would like to hope that each of them, had this clear thought in their minds and in their hearts, so that they truly understood what he meant in that moment when he said that each of you
Yeah.
will take up your own cross.
Right, right. I think that's a very good point. I mean, he's bringing them along in this understanding. They were not going to understand this. Even in their reactions when Jesus was taken and put on the cross, we see that they didn't immediately come to understand this, but they did eventually come to understand it, what he had told them. This commitment expresses itself in a number of different ways, and I've tried to list just a few of these here. This commitment leads to committing. And the first in Philippians chapter 4, in verses, this passage, Philippians chapter 4, we can start in verse 4. It says, "Rejoice in the Lord always." Again, I will say rejoice. "Let your gentle spirit be known to all men. The Lord is near. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Where do you see commitment in that passage?
There's a couple of different aspects of commitment throughout. Rejoice in the Lord always. So the word always is going to denote a commitment, because that means that you're rejoicing in the Lord through whatever you're going through in the time. And then in everything by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known to God. So again, we've got these all-encompassing words, always and everything, which takes a lifelong commitment to be able to do these things.
Mm-hmm. So, along the lines of what you just said, he says the Lord is near. And the idea is the Lord is attendant to us. He is there. And our response to that is prayer. He is there for you. God has made a commitment to you, and our response, I'm going to use the word, is to commit ourselves to reaching to him, to prayer. He says, but in everything by prayer, he says. Okay? So prayer is a statement of our commitment to God in this case. And then this is where I get into this idea commitment leads to committing. And what does he say? What does God want us to commit to him? Our requests, the sources of our trouble and anxiety. So I'm there for you. Prayer is a way you express your commitment to me, and it's a way by which you can commit or entrust to me your needs and your cares and the sources of your anxiety. We've heard people say this, and at times, we might treat it too trivially, this idea, give it to Jesus or turn it over to God. But that's exactly what he's saying to do here. Entrust it to me.
I think too, that certainly that is what it's saying, but our part of that is to be patient and to wait. And I think that's, for me, that, certainly we are to pray, we give it to God, but do we wait long enough for for him to respond? And I think that's part of that commitment, is being patient.
And it doesn't say also, all your prayers are going to be answered. But it does say the peace of God will guard your hearts. So that is our reward, is that peace.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And that's a good point to make here, because we've emphasized, if you want to think of it as the downsides of commitment, there are negative consequences, things that you're going to have to deal with, but there are also upsides. And this is one of these. When we have this commitment to God in this way, then what we gain from that is peace if we'll commit in the right way. That's right.
The conference we just went to, the keynote speaker got up and said a lot of great things. And one of the things that people oohed and awed over after the fact was, he said, you can't hold an anxious thought and a grateful, thankful thought at the same time. And people talked about that afterwards. And But the thing about when people come upon this wisdom that really speaks to someone, usually God said it first. And here it is, be anxious for nothing, with everything in prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. So he's talking about you can't be anxious and thankful at the same time. Well, here it is. If we just look here first, we wouldn't have to worry about going to see these gurus.
Yeah. Yeah. Psalm 31 speaks to this point as well, and also provides reasoning why it is rational for us to commit ourselves to God in this way and to commit our needs to Him. In the first 5 verses, in you, O Lord, I have taken refuge. Let me never be ashamed. In your righteousness, deliver me. Incline your ear to me, rescue me quickly. Be to me a rock of strength, a stronghold to save me, for you are my rock and my fortress. For your name's sake, you will lead me and guide me. You will pull me out of the net which they have secretly laid for me, for you are my strength. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have ransomed me, O Lord God of truth. Was David committed to God? Yeah, he expresses it in a very, substantive way here. The level of commitment that he has. God is his rock, his refuge. God will deliver him. God has the strength. This speaks to the level of trust that's necessary to commit. That David is saying he trusts God ultimately to resolve, right, and to protect him. And for that reason, he's able to say, into your hand I commit my spirit. I entrust it to you. Any thoughts? The scriptures speak to these points. I'm interrupting. David, go ahead.
Well, again, to your point earlier about Jesus modeling this for us, right? You think about verse 5 of that psalm, the words that Jesus uttered in Luke 23 on the cross.
Yeah.
It was the same words.
Yes.
In your hand I commend my spirit. That example of what that total commitment to the Father looks like.
Yep.
Is seen in his example.
Right. And you covered that one, and we won't do that in Luke 23. No, that's okay. No. It's fine. It's an important point to make right here. I should have linked those two together, but we see Jesus quotes that passage on the cross. So here's his demonstration of commitment to the world. He's hung himself on a cross. And what does he refer to? This statement of David's. Right. So I'm showing you commitment here, what this looks like. So thank you for making that point. In 2 Timothy 1 and verse 12, no, it was appropriate. I should move that passage over. In 2 Timothy 1 and verse 12, we have this statement by Paul. For this reason I also suffer these things, Paul says. But I am not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed and am convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him until that day. So this is Paul's translation, and we know what Paul suffered, what he went through. And he's an amazing example of a totally human person. The level of commitment of Paul, which is characteristic of his life, he was an all-in kind of guy, no doubt about it. That's what we would call him. And we see that in him here, but he expresses such, words guided by the Spirit. For this reason, I also suffer these things, but I am not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed and am convinced that he is able to guard what I've entrusted to him until that day. He has committed himself to God fully, and he trusts God, right, to fulfill what God has said he's going to do for him, right? He's going to save him. And this gets us to the importance of faith, commitment. You commit yourself to somebody else because you trust that person. You commit yourself to your spouse at the altar, and you marry this person, you trust them, and you're committing yourself to them. And that's what Paul's describing here in terms of his relationship with God. And it's based on his faith in God. Okay? This confidence that he has that God will fulfill. And there's nothing easy about commitment. I don't think it's not an easy thing. It's something we constantly have to work on, and it's something that should be a part of our prayer to God, to fill us with the resolve, the confidence, and the trust to be committed as we should be. Any thoughts about this before? I take the most time on the first one, and then I rush through the second one. But these things are very closely, these two ideas are very closely aligned. Devotion. And I don't want to have to, distinguish these things, but the idea here, you have a committed person, you have a devoted person. These are very similar ideas. The idea of devotion is somebody who is very loyal, very committed, or dedicated to something. And sometimes it takes extreme forms. Anita and I went to a concert. What was the name of that group? In Greenville. The Siberian. Yeah, the Siberian Orchestra. It's a very good group and very good concert. But they highlighted there was one of their fans there who'd been to, I think, 1,000, several hundred performances of this group over the last 25 or 30 years. So sometimes devotion takes extreme forms, or we've heard for those of us of a certain generation, the Grateful Dead. I mean, that musical group, there were people that just followed them around the country, just constantly. They were devoted, But this devotion is not extreme. This is something that God calls us to. So very loyal, committed, dedicated. And I said fundamentally, devotion is about choosing what is most important over what is less important. And we see this in the idea of commitment. There are different words that are used here. There's one, proskaterio in the Greek. It's used about 10 times. And maybe just look at a couple passages, but it's this idea of conscious, sustained commitment, which almost sounds a little bit redundant. Sustained commitment, yeah?
I thought it was interesting. I just asked what's the difference between, and AI said commitment is a head decision while devotion is a heart response. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah. I don't shy away from that as well, because to be committed and devoted as we're to be, it does involve both what we think of as intellectual, our will, but also our emotions. They've got to be in alignment, our emotions as well as our thoughts and will, in order to achieve this. But let's look at a couple of uses of this word. In Acts 2 and verse 42, this word devoted is used, this Greek word that I just mentioned to you. In Acts 2 and verse 42, these new Christians were able to express this particular attitude. It says they were continually devoting, so that's the idea, continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayers. So what's that communicate? They were committed to this, consistently, fully committed to this. Okay. Another use of this same word in Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12 and verse 12. This word is used in this list of traits that Paul is providing to these Christians to encourage them in their faith. He says, rejoicing in hope, persevering in tribulation, devoted to prayer. This conscious, loyal, commitment to something, to prayer. And it's also used in the scriptures in relation to the relationship of one person to another. Just an example of this in Acts chapter 10. I was going to pull this up here. In Acts chapter 10, describing Cornelius and his conversion here, but it's describing his relationship to two of his servants and a devout soldier. And it says, when the angel who was speaking to him, to Cornelius, had left, he summoned two of his servants and a devout soldier of those who were his personal attendants, it says. I'm not real fond of the way the American Standard translates this. Does somebody have something else other than that here? His personal attendants?
It says a devout soldier from one of those who waited on him continually.
Who waited on him continually. It's the same word. Who did he pick to put on this mission after the angel? Just somebody, who just started working for him last week, No, he picked his devoted servants. That he was sending them on one of the most important tasks ever, right? And who did he pick to do this? His devoted servants. Okay? He picked to do this. So how do we cultivate devotion in the 12 minutes we have left? How do we cultivate devotion, this strong commitment? And the first point I said that we need to we need to learn to recognize value. Most of us don't have trouble being committed to something that we think is valuable, that we want to preserve the value of. And I've pointed to Matthew chapter 13. What point is Jesus trying to make in this series of short parables in Matthew chapter 13? About the kingdom.
You need to figure out what you value above all else.
Yes. And when you figure that out, what do? You commit to it. And how does he communicate this idea? In verses 44 through and 46, he says, the kingdom is heaven like a hidden treasure in a field, which a man found and hid again. And from joy over it, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking fine pearls, and upon finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and he bought it. Again, this idea of all in. Commitment is what, devotion is what Jesus is talking about here. We can distinguish this, and I've pointed to Revelation 3, and what do we know? What's the most famous, aspect of the church at Laodicea that John talks about?
They were lukewarm.
They were lukewarm, and for that reason, he would vomit them from his mouth. And the lukewarm is not devotion. That's the point here. And that passage uses kind of very visceral language to communicate that our Lord, our God, is looking for devotion, not something in between. Something that isn't devotion. And this devotion, this serious commitment, this sustained commitment, we have to prepare ourselves to make choices. We've already been making this point, but it expresses itself in a number of different ways. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus brings up the types of dilemmas that we'll confront in Matthew chapter 6 when he talks about masters and having two masters. No man can serve two masters. Why is that? For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth in this particular case. That, you got to make a choice. You're making a choice. Okay? You can't be there's no divided loyalties, we would call them here. And in Mark chapter 10, in verses 17 through 22, Jesus is talking to the rich young ruler. What was his issue? And I should point out to you, Jesus looked at this man and loved him. And but Jesus was able to get to the point, the flaw very quickly here. But it says Jesus loved this man. This man came to him in sincerity, not like some of the others who came to him. David?
He has a lot of good traits of devotion and commitment, right? I mean, he recognizes the significance of who Jesus is. He's devoted to keeping these commandments. So, he's got a lot of good devotion qualities about him, but the problem is he's devoted to something more than he is to the Lord.
Yeah. Jesus, having the knowledge and the power that he does, he is able to discern what is lacking in him. And he's able to get to the point where he says, the issue is that you love the stuff you have. You're more committed to the stuff you have than your obligations to those around you, right? Because what Jesus says, he tells them to give what he has to the poor, and that's something he's not prepared to do. Right? That's the breaking point for him in regards to his devotion to God. It's maybe not so much, it's how it relates to his commitment to those around him and those in need. And related to that in Galatians 6 and 10, we have this translated for us, I think, in a broad way by the instruction that Paul gives to the Galatians. It's kind of like our rich young ruler statement here in Galatians 6:10. So then, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who are of the household of faith. That our devotion is to God, but by extension, our devotion has to be to those around us too. Right? Love God and love your neighbor. Love God, love your neighbor. Devotion by extension. Down to the last few points here. Back on the consequences, we also, devotion, what comes with that is we have to prepare ourselves to take risks. In Luke chapter 15, Jesus talks about a shepherd who's got 100 sheep. One of them goes missing, and what does the shepherd do? Oh, well, stupid sheep, should have known better. I need to stay here and protect the rest of y'all. You're on your own. How does he respond?
Goes after the one that was lost.
Yeah, he goes after the one that's lost, and I'm emphasizing what are the consequences of that is he's leaving the 99 unattended. And there are limits to how far you want to carry parables, but that's the shepherd's choice here. He's leaving the 99 unattended to go get this one. There are risks involved. He's committed to this one sheep to the point that he's kind of putting the others at risk by going after him. Okay, and I'm drawing a linkage here to Galatians 6. What the text in Galatians 6 at the very beginning, he gives a charge to those who are spiritual. What does he tell them to do? you which who are spiritual.
Restore the one who's caught up in the trespass.
Yeah, so I think the reason why it says you who are spiritual, I'm going to insert, those of you who are devoted are going to do this. And why does it require devotion? Why is it about you who are spiritual? Attend to this.
Those that are not spiritual will have a hard time restoring someone who is.
Okay. That,
taking a fall.
well, that's true. That's very true, Neil. The thing I'm keying in, are there risks involved in trying to restore someone?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You could get yelled at, you know.
Like the preacher said, his job was trying to get people to heaven against their will.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, at a minimum, you know, the risk is rejection, which is never pleasant. Right? So he qualifies this, you who are spiritual, and I'm going to say, you've got to be devoted to go after the one, because there are risks involved. I'm not saying you're going to get run off with shotgun or anything like that, but it's probably happened, you know. But there are risks. It can be could be unpleasant. Right? So that's the point I'm making there. And I guess my final point here, almost on time, says we do need to, related to this, we do need to prepare to make sacrifices. And we're going back to Paul in this regard. How does Paul, again, provide such a great model for us as somebody who was devoted to God and to God's cause?
As you said earlier, he was all in, all or nothing type of guy, and here he talks about in this section how he was willing to leave everything he could have had and could have been behind to follow Christ.
Yeah. Did somebody else have a hand? Gary?
I'm an old man, and I got an old story I gotta tell.
Okay.
All right. My mom was a devout Christian. She was the first of the 4 sisters to become a Christian. And Dorothy, when my mother would go to the house to talk to her about the Bible, and Dorothy finally got tired of it and says, you can't come to the house anymore if you're gonna talk about the Bible. So it hurt my mom's feelings bad, but she said, all right, I guess a little time lapse, and then she says, okay, I'll iron your clothes if you'll let me talk to you about the Bible. Well, she did, because nobody back in the day liked to iron clothes at all. And she converted her and her other 2 sisters.
By ironing.
I
That's
love
a good,
that
that is a
story.
good story.
That's
Yeah,
devotion.
yeah.
Commitment.
So, yeah, we look at these things here and we can understand, because maybe we understand, I mean, how much Paul gave up, what standing he had within the Jewish world, and he gave it up. And in all sense, because he talks about it, he didn't even look back. In a sense, he didn't even communicate regret about this. He was just kind of stating it matter of fact. I mean, it almost sometimes we think of him as being superhuman. I'm not saying he never had, wow, look at that, what I gave up, but he did. And their devotion will require sacrifice. That's the point here. You can't have it all and be devoted.
In verse 7, what things we gain to leave those I counted lost for Christ. The word lost there pairs with the idea of giving up something in order to get something that's of greater value.
Right.
In the shipwreck, they gave up the ship to save their lives.
Yep. That's right. That's my note to myself that I wrote here. Giving up something for something better. Yeah. And that's at the heart of devotion. We need to understand that we are making a sacrifice, but what we gain is so much better, and that should be our motivation. Okay. Very good. Thanks for your participation.